and we'll pop an email out. So you don't need to make notes or ask for slides, we'll send them out to you automatically. So I call it learning outcomes, but really it's topics we're going to cover within this session. We're going to do a definition of OD, or a few definitions of OD, consider what is OD and what isn't OD. A simple 5-step process if you were going to do organisational development, and just discuss different examples of an OD intervention, and a model called Burke Click Win model, which is quite a useful model. We'll also send you a handout of that because we've got a nice visual of that. Okay. So Mark asked, how would we define it? Well, I have my own definition here, and I've taken CIPD definition and also the Roffey Park definition. Roffey Park is I had the guy on the podcast on Monday from Roffey Park the first bit of training I did once I was in a business. Roffey Park do specific qualifications in OD, so it's quite interesting to talk to him. So CIPD say that organisational development is the planned and systematic approach to enabling sustained organisational performance through the involvement of its people. So it's combining people and organisational development, if you like. Roffey Park says it's the work of facilitating organisational success by aligning structural, cultural and strategic realities of work to respond to the needs of an ever-evolving business climate. So they're really making it very externally focused there, but it's about how the organisation adapts to that external environment in many ways. And my definition is OD is about evolving, adapting or improving an organisation in line with strategic goals. So when I'm saying strategic goals, you would assume that the strategic goals are the business wants to go in a certain direction in order to be successful within an external environment. So it's aligning with strategy is the way I see it. So it's about developing and taking things forward. And again, it would include an organisation and people. So couple of polls I have here. This is a little bit of a contentious one, maybe not, and I probably need to explain what I mean by this. So if you were thinking, and this is probably, if you're in a smaller business and you are the only HR, L&D, OD person, then everything sits within your remit. But if you were in a larger organisation where there's an HR department, there's a learning and development team, there's a business improvement team, my question to you is, where would you think organisational development should fit? Should it fit within HR? Should it fit within learning and development? Should it fit within sort of business improvement, process re-engineering? Should it fit above? Should all of those sit underneath it? Or do you not know? And there isn't a right answer, by the way. This is just a way to get us thinking and interacting. So let me find my ability to. I've paused sharing by accident because I'm just trying to find my. I've got so many things up on the screen. I'm going to share my screen again. Going to lose that. I'll check the poll up. Caitlin, can you see the poll? It's hit, the button has just disappeared for me. I've got it missing. Can you see the poll? Thank you. Okay, so those are the questions you've had a chance to think about it now. Where would you put it if you're thinking about organisational development? And maybe use the chat if I can see a number of you have selected a specific way of answer. Oh, you put it, actually, you smart people there, Kate, Elise, and Guy. Yeah, that's quicker than me doing the poll, but maybe less visual. So yeah, so Kate, Elise, and Guy, why have you gone for D? Why have you gone for D? And I'll show you where others have. Keyword strategy. So interestingly, in terms of this, the majority have put that, if you said that things should sit underneath it, which is really quite radical. So I have thought that for some time, actually. I've always thought that organisational development, actually HR should be a subset of it, really, because it's strategies that you do to enable the OD, and same with learning and development. You could argue other things. However, where does it actually sit in most organisations? It usually sits as a subset of HR. In fact, everything ends up sitting under HR, doesn't it? It tends to be HR sits there, and then you'll often have learning, maybe you have organisational development, maybe business improvement sits somewhere else. So isn't that interesting that we're all seeing that actually it should be the overarching, there would be a logic for those things to be subsets of OD, because in theory, it's more strategic. In theory, it's about aligning with the business, and development might be a subset from it. HR strategies like recruitment strategy might be a subset. So interesting that that's where we've all put it. There isn't an official right answer. I'm just really intrigued, and we should take a screenshot of that, Caitlin, as to how many of us thought that that was the way it would go. So let's go into what it actually is. So that was our just for fun involvement. Let me make sure that you can see where we are still, hopefully. So if I go on to my next slide, the sorts of things that might fit within organisational development, topics that, and if you were to study, say, a master's on it, then you may well have topics within these areas which would be covered. So definitely organisational structure and design. So structure, that's going to fit within it. So if you find yourself in, say, a workforce planning role, that might be a job role there, then that would be OD, right? Because the point of your workforce planning is to align the departments and the people and the skills with the organisational strategy. Leadership and management systems and processes, well, they're all about getting the best out of people in order to deliver the best results for an organisation, so they should be aligned with the strategy. And systems and processes, whether it's a reward process, a recruitment process, or a performance management process, the way in which those are designed should be designed in a strategic way to deliver the results that you're after. So again, makes it an OD approach. For me, a bit of a differentiator that makes OD different from other types of HR, if you like, because all of these other things could, in theory, be HR or learning and development, is when you start talking about culture or change. I think you definitely, if you're doing anything to do with culture, anything to do with change, you're very likely to be in an OD area. Continuous improvement and learning. So that could be, you know, continuous learning environment, continuous improvement. Some big organizations have almost a continuous improvement department. For me, that's an interesting area because the business I used to work for had it separately, and that was where they had things like lean. It was very much an engineering firm, so it was sort of, they had specific ways of managing those. And it's set totally separately from anything to do with people, but actually you could see the logic of them fitting together. But I suppose what that was very much about, it was looking at processes, whereas here, if we're talking about continuous improvement and learning, say a learning organization, then that's quite different. Evidence-based practice. Well, you can't really move within HR now for not hiring something which is evidence-based. For me, I think this is about whether we either go and look at the data that's there in terms of the research, so we try and put things in place which are likely to work based on previous research that we can see, or it's about looking within our own organisation. Evidence is quite hard to get in the people environment, in the people sphere. And so it is more about getting the best information possible and making an objective view as opposed to a subjective view. And then something like strategic talent management, that would of course fit in because you're maybe, again, recruiting. It's a bit like leadership and management systems and processes, but it's maybe a talent retention or strategies which would link with your organizational structure, your workforce plan, and also the way you develop and manage people. So those for me would be topics there. If anyone's got any topics that are missing from that they think are OD, by all means put them in the chat, because I'm not saying that this is you know, the be all and end all. So I'd be interested if any of you think I've missed anything. But those for me, if you're working in any of those areas, then you could feel that you're probably in an OD space. So then to make these more real, for me, these are things where I would say are examples of Roffey Park. And I took this, the source here is from, sorry, examples of organisational development, and I got these from Roffey Park. So they would say examples of OD are where you are changing the structure, culture, strategy, or processes of an individual job through to an entire organisation. The application of behavioural science knowledge, so that's evidence-based practice or evidence, to facilitate transformation. Great example of using long words, but you could make it more simply. So it's also something about involving an organisation, involving people to improve the organisational effectiveness. So helping them to think differently, use new skills. So it's bringing others along in terms of the organisation. And I like these ones where you're very much remembering it's not just the organisation or the systems, it's very much about the people within them. And that's for me is where OD becomes a people tool. It's about educating, communicating, developing, training people. It may be about promoting high productivity, performance, quality, financial performance. So it should be about making sure that any changes you're putting in place are going to impact the business positively. Facilitation of change in a flexible, adaptive, and often participative, again, involving people, and it's making something sustainable. So OD is strategic, and by that it was saying it's sustainable. It's not about quick wins necessarily, it's about consistent long-term change in the right direction, which has a long-term impact. So you're making the right decision in how you do it. So that's what Roffey Park's definition. You can see those, and I've got other examples later. Often you hear people say that they're going to deliver an OD intervention, an intervention on somebody. And that for me is, you might have an OD strategy, an HR strategy, an overall strategy which includes organisational development. It might include HR and learning development, but you might want to do a specific OD intervention, or you're thinking about doing it. In order to do that, you need to go through this process where you are really looking to be evidence-based, which we talked about earlier. So first of all, you need to clearly understand a need for any change. And that needs to be a strategic need that we were talking about before. So it might be about understanding what the business strategy is, and then think why or how OD, HR, L&D change in the broadest sense can support that strategy. So how can we make this happen? And you need to come up with some real evidence of the fact that there is a need to change or a gap. And you need to have those specifics. By evidence is about specific facts. So it could be, we've got this number of people who are in a specific role or have a specific skill set, or providing this kind of feedback. And by benchmarking ourselves against someone else externally, we've got a gap, or by benchmarking ourselves against where we want to be, we might see a gap. So we need to identify a need and have data to validate that that's not just a hunch. It's not just what the MD says. It's actually something that you've got data for. You then, of course, think, well, how can we solve those needs? You look at ways in which you could do it, and look at a variety of options. Weigh up those different options in terms of how the evidence for their validity, and also whether they're going to impact on your specific data. Once you put them in place, of course, I mean, it's always the same cycle, this, frankly. You then put things in action, but the most important thing, which people so often forget to do, is actually evaluate the impact. See, have we made any progress? Are we going on the right direction? And ultimately, something like this is a change process. So you need to expect to do it on a regular basis. You don't just go, yeah, done, job done. It's something that should happen. It should be iterative. But in order to do that, you have to keep closing the loop. So you evaluate the impact, go back to the start, and then tweak. So do we need to address the needs further, change it in any way? So the reason you needed the data in the first place is otherwise you're not going to have any metrics to demonstrate that you've achieved what you wanted to do or had any impact. So you've got your data to show where your need is, but also you need to have data of some description, whether it's survey data, whether it's retention data, whether it's competency, skills data. Example, we've got a 360 tool now that gives you macro data, so you could benchmark key skills using survey, 360 survey now against key competencies, and again in 12 months, 18 months time. So there's different ways in which you can measure the impact, but the key is measuring it. Some OD jargon, feel free to chuck some of those into the chat, typical OD jargon, but here's one I prepared earlier. Some of these terms that you may hear. And lots of them, I think you have to go, what do I really mean by that? A lot of it, when putting a label on it, we may not necessarily, anyway, I suppose is my point actually, and that's my next question. To what degree do you think you're doing organisational development currently, despite the fact you may feel a bit of a fraud saying that you are? So if you understand a number of these terms, or at least familiar with them, or have used some of them if they are activities, for example, World Cafe or focus groups, then you could see these as terms that might sit there. So if I took those two examples of World Cafe or focus group type things, those are examples where we might use those to gather evidence or data about people's views of where we are currently or where we should be. So you're involving others in that. Other terms that you might come across, we talked about talent planning, systems thinking. All of these are models, complexity thinking, and I talk about these in the podcast episode, and we'll chuck that into the chat if you don't mind, actually, Caitlin, this week's episode with Graham. So lots of these jargon terms I talk to Graham about as to what do we really mean by that, these and others. And then we've got the examples I've got here where it goes into real business type organizational development. So lean engineering and Six Sigma, those are sort of organizational development processes around systems. So if you worked in an engineering type organization, you might see those. And then there's Burke Click Win model, which is a model that I learned at Roffey Park probably about 20 years ago that I'm going to share with you in a moment, which is quite a useful model if you want to apply OD in your organization, but you want a structure, something to think around, maybe to build your strategy around. So time for me just to take a little catch my breath, and I just thought I'd give you an opportunity to say to what degree you think you're doing OD currently yourselves. And again, I'm just going to ask Caitlin, so I'm keeping her working in the background, to pop up the poll for me here. For some reason, I can't find the poll on my bar this afternoon. So to what degree do you think you're doing OD currently? I can't see who says what, just an opportunity for you. So are you not sure? Do you think you're not at all? Like, do you think you're just doing it a little? Do you think you're actually doing it quite a lot more than you thought you were? Or are you doing it most of the time? So let's see what you think in terms of your own view. And of course, the question is, I don't know, it may be that you're doing it a little, and that's appropriate for your role, or it may be that you could be doing it more. Maybe, let's say you're in a specialist HR role and you're in recruitment, which is kind of a subset. You could use more OD in your role, possibly, if you wanted to make sure that what you're doing is really strategic. So you could bring a bit more in. Anyone else want to participate? We're at 73%. Give you a couple of seconds, and I'm going to end the poll and share. So what we've got here is, yeah, so about 35% of you think actually you're doing it quite a lot more than you think you might, and a majority think you're doing it a little, and just one of you thinking at the moment you're not doing it at all. And there's no criticism. It may not be your role, but the purpose really of this is to maybe help you realize that you maybe could do it more, potentially, or you might be doing more than you think. So if I was to then look at these examples here, these are examples where I'm sort of showing what I would perceive to be an OD angle on a typically HR L&D task. So it's where if you want to do a bit more OD, you could by just switching the OD angle. So if you are in a recruitment role and you've been given that job to recruit people with the right skills to fulfill a specific strategy, so that's kind of in HR or learning and development, more likely HR, then the OD bit of that is helping to diagnose and define those new skills needed to support the business strategy. So the OD bit is working out what do we need, what's the vision, and then the recruitment bit is the delivering against that vision. So could you be doing more of the could you be doing more of the diagnosing and defining, or are you doing more, in which case that makes it more OD? Of course, one of those, this is just a little slice of an OD strategy, so that might be part of it, and these might all build up together to support it. So if I go from the left on this one, so the OD bit of this would be if you are getting involved in defining organizational values or strategic goals that are going to be cascaded. So it's understanding and defining what they are. That would be, again, it's quite strategic in terms of aligning it. But then when you're getting the whole organization to align against those and to make sure their objectives and reporting against them, make sure the objectives are aligned with strategic goals, or the values are reflected within your recognition framework, then that's more of the sort of the doing. They're both equally important, but the main thing is making sure that they're aligned, right? Because if we just do performance management for the sake of it and there's no aligning, then it isn't taking the business forward in a positive way. But when we align the HR and L&D versus with the OD bit, then it all joins up. I won't go through all of these word by word because you can read through those, but let me take this one. And this one, defining a competency or skills framework. So the definition of something versus the monitoring or evaluating and maybe even developing. So we've defined our skills framework. We've maybe also defined what the to be is in terms of key skills in our organisation, monitoring the skills, and actually creating the training to upskill against those would be the HR L&D bit of it. And again, it's all joining up. And then you can remember our 5-step process. You're then going on that journey, you'd be able to stop and say, right, where are we now? Have we achieved where we want to be? And what do we need to do next? So it all becomes joined up. If you had something about, if you're involved in, let's say, defining the vision for people management behaviors and processes, so defining how managers should work within the organization, maybe it's about improving a bullying harassment policy, or improving something there, defining some sort of vision strategically, then actually doing it, embedding it, rolling out those new policies is the doing of it. Oh, Guy says, I've been involved with a board skills matrix. So that's actually defining what the skills should be for people at board level, Guy. Is that what you're saying? So you're defining it? And I suppose, so let's just say
yes, that's right, Lucinda, yes. It's particularly relevant to non-exec directors. Obviously, the executives are assessed separately, but it's actually looking at succession planning as well. Because there's a requirement to rotate NEDs every three years normally. So
that's a great example of OD there, isn't it? So what you've talked about is succession planning, and so you've got a business risk and requirement that you have to rotate your NEDs, and also key skills could go. So
and they're bringing different skills to the board as well. Yeah,
that's another great as well, because often old school routes, you just end up with who you've got on the board, as opposed to going, what skills do we need?
Exactly. Yeah.
And then, so that was the main. And what did you do, Guy, to meet once you defined it? What happened in the organisation to fulfil against it?
That was the basis of recruitment of non-exec directors, particularly, and induction training for new directors, and obviously dynamics of relationships between the chairman and the CEO.
And did they all bring in from? Did you manage to develop any people up the organisation?
Interesting. No, it was more. I think it was more focused around NEDs and the succession planning, the wider, because they're coming in from the outside market. But the relationship with the senior management team is important, and the board. So it was useful from that perspective, possibly to bring in further, either CEOs or finance directors, or more executive type roles. But it was mainly focused at the NEDs, I think.
Okay, so and you can see there, so no, but you could have exactly the same principle with a board internally, where you might want to develop people, and that could be part of a talent management framework. It could be part of career pathways, but so you're losing people at mid. It could be about a retention strategy, helping people to see what the skills are of being an executive board member and take them up. So it's
I also dealt with this at the charity level, boards of trustees, which is particularly relevant to the governance codes.
Got you. So and I won't dig in further, but I was just thinking the other area where that could go into, you're also then potentially moving into stuff around culture. So although we're talking really about skills, which is about recruitment, succession planning, but you might have something about the interrelationship between boards and execs, etc. But all of that basically is a great example of something where it fits, and it's a strategic piece of OD work, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, it is also relevant to the chairman, who's a key individual as well, and the CEO, of course.
Thank you very much for sharing that, Guy. I appreciate it. It's very nice. Always nice to hear from somebody. So let me move on to the Burke Click Win model, just with one eye on the time with Fit for People as well. I don't know if anyone here is familiar with Burke Click Win, so I'm rotating too quickly. I don't know, Guy, have you come across this model?
No, I'm sorry, no.
No, that's fine. So I found this useful if you were looking at an organisation from an overall point of view. And this came Burke Click Win. It was, I think it was 1992 when it was originally published as a leadership change and performance model. And the idea is you use it as a sort of OD instrument. And the thinking is that you can look at the whole organisation. So you can see actually we've got the external environment, and they always say that things are going to be driven by that. And if you think about it, just a very simplistic example, if we'd have said 10 years ago that everybody's going to be able to work remotely, everyone would have laughed at it. That wasn't going to happen because everyone would laugh, right? Whereas actually COVID, something, an external driver where people were forced to physically work at home, then that drove something where it had significant changes. Most likely it came through the culture route, because you would see how things, the culture had, people had to work remotely, but then that had an impact where new systems and policies had to be put in place, whether it was actually physical systems of Zoom and Teams or home working policies. Was it about how do we manage people effectively? How do we lead people when we're not visible? How do we model the right behaviors? How do we focus on things like well-being? So there are certain things that came through, but all of these things interlink and knock on. And then you've got work climate, which is about how we feel in terms of our team, the relationship we've got with the people we work with. So you hear quite a lot right now about maybe people not having a sense of belonging, some stuff about lack of belonging, possibly people not feeling as part of a team as they did previously, can impact on people's motivation. Flip side of it is some people love working independently, so they're more motivated. But all of these things basically knock on. And the thinking of the Burke Click Win model is it helps you understand drivers of change, and it kind of helps you see how they impact on performance from the top down. It says that all of them are integrated to a greater or lesser extent. So in terms of going into this, and actually that's on one of the podcasts I did earlier, I explained into a little bit more detail, but just at a high level, they would say that overall the external environment is going to kick things off, absolutely, in terms of those. The most important thing, which isn't going to be that surprising in terms of this, is our culture, in terms of the environmental culture that's within an organisation. But of course, that is a factor of our leadership, the way we operate around here, our management practices, and to a certain extent, the systems and policies that are in place. So that is going to be impacted there. Also, leadership are going to impact on the mission and strategy. That is impacted by the external environment. So if we've got a real sort of aggressive growth strategy, that's going to make a difference. If we've got a let's save money strategy, cost cutting strategy, then that might impact an organisational structure in terms of cutting or restructuring. Or it might be we've got a big growth strategy, have a massive recruitment drive. That's going to link into, again, how people are managed and management practices. The environment that we're within will affect the work climate. So are we very bureaucratic? Are we very laissez-faire? All of those come through in terms of our work climate, which is basically how it feels to work in an organisation at a team level. And then how it feels to work in an organisation at a team level impacts our motivation, our clarity of what the task is and expectation, how it plays into our individual needs and values and how we feel about working here. And all of that then impacts on our performance and then falls into the organisation's performance. So how I would use something like this is if someone came to me and said, oh, do you know what, we need a new policy on some XYZ, then I might think, okay, so what do we really mean by that? And how does it fit into all of these things? So we might write a new policy, but how do we get managers to do it? What is that policy going to send? What message does it send? How does it impact the culture? Or actually, would it be supported or undermined by the culture? If we say we want to move to a culture of ongoing conversations and performance management, which is a really common one, but we have an organisational culture of being very high level. We'd never ever tell people what the overall strategic goals are. Managers don't talk to people on a regular basis. Leaders model behaviours where it's kind of do as I say. They don't model any of those behaviours. Then it's not as simple as just moving to a culture of ongoing performance management conversations. You've got to look at all these other things that need changing in order to do it. If you've got an external environment where there's lots of competition for key resource, then we have to think about all of these areas. Are we going to mission and strategy? That would be something where you think about employer brand. Have we got the right brand to attract those people in? Have we got the right leaders to keep them? Have we got the right culture to keep them? So all of these things, it's quite good as a model, just if you're changing something, thinking about what else do I need to consider? Because if you try and change something in isolation, the reality is culture will pull it back. And this gives you a way to look at all the different tensions that you might also need to include. So you can obviously look at more on that. I think Caitlin's already put the link in where you can download the model itself. So final slide if you want to be more OD focused in your organisation, and hopefully some of the examples we've shown show that you probably already are doing more than you think, and maybe you can be just really a bit more confident that, yeah, you are being strategic. It's really just about making sure everything you're doing is joined up and aligned and is strategic. So it's always keep an eye on whether today's operational activities are serving the future vision. Make sure you always know why you're doing something. We are sometimes asked to do things, and you need to know that the why is right. So, you know, you've been asked a classic example I used to in training. People can say, oh, this person needs presentation skills, or I've got a need for a certain training need, time management or something. And you say, okay, so what's the actual problem? What makes you think that that is the solution? Because people come to you and say, fix this with this solution. When you dig underneath it, you realize it's not a time management issue. This person knows how to time manage, but actually it's a workload issue, because, you know, they've got 3 people available in a team when there should be 8. And actually, when you dig that out, that's actually a recruitment issue, because you can't recruit people with the right skills. Or it might be it's a retention issue. So often we're asked to do things which are quite tactical, but it's more of a strategic problem, and we need to look at it more holistically to genuinely fix it. That means we have to balance short-term requirements with longer-term benefits and challenge back on things which are very short-term. Try to always make sure we know what the business strategy is and connect activities with that. Also think, if you're putting something in place, how can you future-proof it? How can you make sure that it can grow with you, it can develop with you, it's going to continue to be relevant, as opposed to be something that's just a good idea right now. When you're working with others, help other people know why change is coming, why things need to happen. When they understand why, it's much easier for people to buy into it and to carry on doing it the right way. You are the custodian of culture, challenging culture, you know, making sure that culture within the organisation is supportive of the goals. Making sure it's congruent in that the goals that are spoken about, actually the behaviours of the organisation support them. Otherwise, you are really beating your head against a wall. And aim to be as systematic as possible. So have evidence and try and see through what you start. So even though things are going to take a long time, have small goals. So you go, okay, we did that, we've moved it to this first phase, and this is where we go from here. So those are the things that I'd say you can do really practically to take this forward. If anyone has any questions at all, please feel free to pop them in the chat. Just to close down here, I'm going to pop up what's coming up. So we've got an HR Uprising coffee club. So any of you here who'd like to network more, the coffee club is basically a network. So if it's imagine it's a group of us like this, but we would have our cameras on for an hour and we would raise specific points. If it's a large group, we put into breakouts with 3 or 4 people in similar industries or organisations, and we go, right, this is the challenge I've got. And it's an opportunity to network with like-minded people. And I think, you know, most of us are working remotely. It's easy not to do that. So this one is an open challenge one. Sometimes we do topics where we share information on those. And then you can see we've got a variety of webinar topics coming up in January. So those are the topics that are there. Feel free to register for any of those. Got a 360 discovery session that was really popular last time. That's something you can use as an OD tool, where we actually talk about how you can use 360 in an organisation and show you how our system works there. And then there's other various useful resources that are here. If anyone, Ken, could you pop the final, if anyone wants us to get in touch on anything that I've shared with you so far and wants us to get in touch directly, we'll pop the poll up so you can just indicate there and we'll happily follow up with you. But other than that, I'll just stay on the line. Thank you very much for joining today. Yes, you'll get the slides automatically, Anita, and you'll get a link to the video. So that will come out anyway from my colleague, Caitlin. Thanks everyone for joining. I hope you found